Riverside never fully sleeps. Even after the city quiets, some corners remain restless, like the lot behind the abandoned textile mill on Florin Avenue. It's a place most avoid, half swallowed by weeds, broken glass crunching underfoot, and rusted steel bones of a once thriving factory. It was here, on a heavy August night, that a city worker stumbled across what he first thought was a pile of discarded clothing. A few steps closer, and the truth landed like a gut punch. A man's body, face down, motionless, limbs twisted unnaturally, skin littered with bruises, cuts, and dried blood. His pockets were turned out. No wallet. No phone. Nothing but a tattered strip of cloth in his clenched fist. But it was the tattoo on his wrist that stood out. A faded swallow just below the thumb, worn like a forgotten message. Whoever he was, someone had made sure his identity wouldn't be easy to recover. Detective Priya Kapoor arrived minutes later, stepping past the yellow tape with quiet resolve. The kind of calm that unnerves people more than shouting ever could. Her eyes scanned the scene, not just for evidence but for intention. Someone left him here. Someone wanted this body to disappear. Kapoor crouched beside the body, taking in the details that others might overlook. The position of the arms, the scrape across the cheek, the way the fingers curled tightly around that scrap of cloth. Nothing about it felt random. It wasn't just a killing, it was a message, maybe even a warning. But without ID and no immediate witnesses, the message stayed sealed, for now. Within hours, forensics swept the site. The pipe found near the body carried traces of blood and skin, consistent with blunt force trauma. But it wasn't the weapon that held Kapoor's attention. It was the silence around it all. No defensive wounds. No signs of a struggle. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and how quickly they needed to vanish. Later that night, she stood beside Detective Malik Washington, staring at the evidence bag holding the tattooed wrist's photo. "You ever seen anything like this?" he asked, low and steady. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed locked on the image. "No," she finally said. "But someone out there knows who he is. And they're counting on the rest of us never finding out." What began as a faceless murder would trigger a chain of revelations that no one, not even Kapoor, could see coming. A week later, the autopsy would confirm the cause of death. But it wasn't the blunt force trauma that turned the case upside down, it was the DNA report. A near match. A stranger across town. A name no one expected. This wasn't just a homicide. It was the beginning of a family secret stretching back decades, sealed in silence, buried by systems, and now cracked open by blood. Have you ever felt like your life was missing a piece? Learning the truth, only after death forced it into the light? Do stories like this move you? Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. The coroner's report came back with clinical clarity. Blunt force trauma to the side of the skull, likely caused by a heavy object swung with intent. The angle suggested surprise, not confrontation. A clean hit. No hesitation. No second strike. The weapon, found discarded 6 feet from the body, was a rusted steel pipe, worn down by time, not a recent acquisition. Blood, tissue, and a partial fingerprint smudged along its curve would later match the victim, but nothing else. No prints on file. No match in national databases. Detective Kapoor paced the room as the details were read aloud, arms folded, brow tense. Across from her, Malik Washington sat motionless, absorbing the information with the quiet calculation of someone trained to see what others missed. "He was caught off guard," Malik said, finally breaking the silence. Kapoor nodded, still watching the body photo on the projector screen. "No struggle," she replied. "Someone he trusted, or someone who moved faster than fear could kick in." The personal items, or lack of them, were telling. No wallet. No phone. Just that torn piece of fabric clenched like a final thought. It had texture, possibly denim, but no label or stitching that could trace it to a brand or owner. The man had been effectively erased, until science began filling in the void he left behind. Leads dried up fast. No witnesses came forward. No camera footage from the mill's perimeter. Local informants, when pressed, offered nothing more than vague speculation. The man had no criminal record, no medical implants, no dental records on file. The usual routes detectives relied on? Blocked. It was Detective Kapoor who pushed for a more advanced approach. One that raised eyebrows among some of her colleagues: genetic genealogy. The process didn't rely on criminal databases, but on open-source platforms where people voluntarily uploaded their DNA, searching for ancestors, heritage, or lost relatives. GeneMatch was one of those platforms. Kapoor had studied its potential ever since it helped identify a serial offender in another state. Only this time she wasn't tracking a killer. She was trying to name the dead. With a court-approved request, a small team extracted the man's DNA and ran it through the system. Even a partial match, second or third cousin, could narrow the scope. It was a long shot, but it beat sitting on silence. To manage the complexity of the match analysis, Kapoor contacted Dr. Sofia Delgado, a geneticist who had worked with law enforcement before. Precise, methodical, and fiercely protective of data ethics, Delgado knew the stakes. Their plan: upload the DNA, scan for familial links, and, if fortune held, identify someone who had never even known he was being searched for. The upload to GED match didn't yield an exact identity, but what it returned was close, almost too close to ignore. A profile flagged as a near match lit up on Delgado's screen. The genetic markers pointed toward a sibling-level relationship. Not a cousin. Not distant. This was immediate family, closer than anyone had expected from a first run. The user attached to the match was Amara Navarro. Her file wasn't tied to law enforcement. She'd uploaded her DNA years earlier as part of a personal search into her own adoption history. A journalist by profession, based in Riverside, born in the same year as the unidentified victim. Kapoor reviewed the data 3 times. The probability scores didn't leave much room for doubt. A young man found beaten to death in an abandoned lot. A woman across town with shared DNA pointing to a relationship deeper than coincidence. No fingerprints. No phone. No ID. But buried in genetic code, something had survived. Kapoor looked across her desk at Washington, who had just returned from interviewing a local who remembered nothing but the sound of a stray dog barking. "This match," she said, sliding the file across the table. "It might be our first real lead. And it's not just about who he was, it's about who he belonged to." A name finally within reach. Her byline appeared regularly on the front page of the Riverside Chronicle. Amara Navarro, known for pulling corruption from behind closed doors and forcing it into daylight. When detectives Kapoor and Washington knocked on her door, she wasn't chasing a lead. She was editing a draft on city budget misuse. She greeted them with guarded curiosity. Journalists weren't strangers to the police, but this visit wasn't about a source or a leak or a request for comment. "We're looking into a case involving a man whose DNA is closely connected to yours," Kapoor explained, keeping her tone measured. Amara tilted her head, eyebrows knit in confusion. "I don't have any close relatives. I was adopted. It's just me." Kapoor opened a file and slid a printed photo across the table. The moment hung in the room like a held breath. Amara leaned forward, her eyes tracing the contours of a bruised face. Her hand instinctively moved to her own cheek, fingers resting where his injuries bloomed. There was something in the eyes, sharp, thoughtful, slightly tired. Familiar. She didn't speak right away. "I've never seen him before," she said softly. "But it's like he's staring back." Kapoor asked if she'd be willing to provide a DNA sample. Amara agreed without hesitation. Whatever this was, it demanded answers. The DNA test didn't take long. Within a few days, the lab sent its confirmation. Full sibling match. The man in the photo wasn't just a genetic coincidence. He was her twin. Amara stared at the report in silence. The numbers were clear, but the meaning behind them refused to settle. She pressed her thumb over Elias's name, testing how it felt to say it aloud. It didn't come easy. Her adoptive parents, both retired school teachers, had been loving but reserved. They never lied, but they never offered much about where she came from either. She remembered once asking if she had any brothers or sisters. Her mother's answer was soft but final. "Not that we know of, sweetheart." That single sentence had lived in her memory for years, now tangled in contradiction. She sat with Kapoor in Washington, recounting what little she knew. Born at St. Bridget's Community Hospital. Adoption finalized within weeks. No record of biological relatives. She'd searched a few times, mostly out of curiosity, not desperation. "I thought maybe I'd find a cousin. Maybe a name. Never this," she said, voice low. Washington spoke gently. "We don't have the full picture yet, but we're going to find out who he was. And why someone wanted him gone." Amara nodded. For the first time in her life, her story had an unexpected second chapter. Later that night, Amara sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by records she'd pulled from a filing cabinet she hadn't opened in years. Adoption forms, hospital notes, a faded envelope her adoptive mother had once marked, "For when you're ready." None of it mentioned a sibling. Nothing pointed to Elias. Yet now, his name was written into her life with permanence. She opened her laptop and typed it out slowly. Elias Navarro. He had existed. He had walked the same city streets. And she had never known. She began to dig, not as a journalist chasing a headline, but as a sister trying to reclaim time lost to paperwork, oversight, and silence. Across the city, Kapoor and Washington reviewed the details with new urgency. This case was no longer just about a murder. It was about identity, about a family torn apart before it ever had a chance to form. What secrets had kept them separated? And who had chosen to leave one child in the dark? Have you or someone close to you ever discovered a relative you never knew existed? A sibling, a parent, someone whose name was lost until a document or test brought it back? Share your story in the comments. Let's talk about the pieces we didn't know were missing, until they found their way home. Elias Navarro never had the luxury of roots. According to what few records remained, he entered the foster system just weeks after birth. The hospital where he was born, St. Bridget's, had been underfunded, overworked, and chaotic. Somewhere in the administrative shuffle, he slipped through. No matching discharge file. No record of follow-up. Just a single line on an outdated intake form. Infant, male. Transferred to state care. He was moved often. From group homes to short-term foster placements, each shift like a reset button on his life. He never stayed long enough to become someone's son. Never knew a sibling, never saw a family photo that included his face. But Elias was never passive. In his own quiet way he adapted. He learned when to speak and when silence kept him safe. He figured out how to read people fast, faster than most adults. Art became his outlet. First, with borrowed pencils in the margins of discarded notebooks. Later, on public walls, under bridges, behind alleys. His murals weren't tags, they were messages. Scenes of people reaching for each other, faces torn in half and stitched back together, birds in flight over locked fences. He painted what he didn't have: freedom, connection, home. Locals knew his work even if they didn't know his name. To them he was just the kid with the colors. The one who never asked for anything, but somehow left pieces of hope behind wherever he went. By his late teens, Elias had aged out of the foster system with little more than a duffel bag and a reputation for keeping to himself. He bounced between shelters and couch offers, sometimes working odd jobs, other times sleeping near the edge of the river with a hoodie pulled over his eyes. He kept painting. Walls, tunnels, boarded storefronts. He wasn't tagging territory, he was documenting it. One of his murals, a child lifting a city skyline like a curtain, appeared overnight outside a shuttered school. Within a week, it had been painted over by the city's maintenance crew. But Elias's world changed when he met Viktor Kozlov. Kozlov ran more than just low-level operations. He had influence, real reach. When his crew noticed Elias's murals, someone passed along a message: "Come meet the boss." It wasn't a request. At first, Kozlov kept things subtle. He offered money for Elias to tag buildings as warnings, graffiti as a message to rivals. When Elias refused, the offers became threats. Soon, Elias was doing more than painting. He became a courier, low risk, low visibility. The kind of person no one paid attention to. He tried to draw a line, but it kept moving. He didn't talk about it. Not to the few people he trusted. Not even to the woman he met one summer, who had told him he should sell his art, not give it away to walls that couldn't thank him. Elias never said it aloud, but deep down he knew he was stuck. Despite the life he was tangled in, Elias never stopped trying to hold on to something decent. People in the city's forgotten corners knew him, not by name but by presence. He'd hand over his last $5 to someone colder than he was. Fix a broken latch on a neighbor's gate without being asked. Quiet acts that left impressions but never a trail. He wasn't loud about the things he believed in, but you could read them on the walls he painted. A mother holding the hand of a child with no face. A house stitched together with wire and thread. An angel kneeling in a rainstorm, wings made of barbed wire and newspaper. Some said Elias was trying to make sense of his life the only way he knew how. Others said he was warning people. Maybe both were true. What became clear over time was this: Elias was trying to get out. The jobs Kozlov assigned grew riskier, more exposed. Elias had started stashing his artwork, pulling back from the crew missing meetings. He told one person, just one, that he was thinking of leaving for good. "I'm not built for this," he had said. "I'm not like them." But by then Kozlov had noticed the distance. And in a world like his, hesitation wasn't just disloyal, it was dangerous. Elias wasn't just a muralist anymore. He had become a liability. And for someone like Kozlov, liabilities didn't get warnings, they got erased. Kozlov's name surfaced quietly, tucked between reports and offhand comments from reluctant informants. His crew operated in whispers: money laundering, illicit trades, intimidation. Nothing splashy, nothing that would make the news unless someone ended up in the morgue. Kapoor and Washington started tracing Elias's last known movements. A convenience store camera provided the first real break. The footage was old, grainy, but clear enough. Elias was caught in a tense exchange with a woman outside the building. Short jacket, heavy boots, hair pulled back tight. Marisol Vega. Her name wasn't new to either detective. She'd long been Kozlov's right hand, his enforcer, his cleaner, depending on the day. She had a way of being present in situations where people disappeared, but never left anything solid behind. In the video, Elias looked strained. He gestured sharply, his voice muffled by poor audio, but his posture told the story. He wasn't delivering a message. He was pleading. Marisol, on the other hand, stood still. She didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't soften. Whatever he was asking, she wasn't promising him anything. Washington played the clip back a second time, then a third. He wanted out, he said, voice flat. Kapoor agreed. And she wasn't allowed to help him. The conversation in that video wasn't casual. It was a warning. Maybe the last one Elias ever got. The piece of cloth found in Elias's hand finally gave up a sliver of truth. Forensics ran a fiber analysis and cross-referenced it with known samples. A technician flagged something unusual. The fabric matched a custom jacket once worn by Marisol Vega, an item captured in multiple surveillance stills over the past year. That connection, while circumstantial on its own, took on new weight in context. Kapoor and Washington revisited every known associate of Elias's within Kozlov's orbit. What emerged was a pattern, small, easily missed details that began stacking together. Witnesses recalled seeing Elias in areas he typically avoided. Others mentioned he'd been acting nervous, asking questions that weren't his to ask. One source, a mechanic who occasionally worked on cars tied to Kozlov's crew, said Elias had shown up a week before his death, asking about a route out of the city. Didn't say much, the man recalled, but he looked like someone counting hours. The detectives brought Marisol in for questioning. She arrived guarded but cooperative. Her answers were practiced, polished. She acknowledged knowing Elias, claimed they'd had disagreements, denied any knowledge of his disappearance. She smiled too easily when asked direct questions. Didn't blink when shown the footage. Still, without a confession or direct witness, they couldn't hold her. As she left the precinct, Washington watched her walk away. She knows, he said quietly. Kapoor didn't disagree. The problem is proving it, before someone else decides to disappear too. The break came from someone no one expected. Luca Moretti had spent most of his adult life skimming the edge of trouble. Owner of a bar frequented by Kozlov's people, he wasn't trusted, but he wasn't ignored either. He knew things, the kind of details people mutter when they assume no one's listening. Luca walked into the precinct late one night, reeking of cigarette smoke and nerves. He didn't ask for immunity. He asked for safety. He told them Marisol had gone underground. After Elias's death, she stopped showing up at the usual spots. Word was she'd relocated to a farmhouse outside the city. Not a rental. Not official. A place Kozlov kept off the books. Kapoor and Washington checked the records. Nothing came up. No deeds, no utilities, no paper trail. But satellite images revealed an isolated structure surrounded by trees and gravel, just beyond county lines. It was enough to build on. They secured a warrant, called in a tactical team, and moved before sunrise. A cold fog hung over the fields as unmarked cars lined the dirt road. No one spoke much. Everyone knew how these things could turn. Inside the farmhouse, silence met them. No voices, no movement, until the back door creaked. Marisol stood in the kitchen, staring through the window, holding a coffee mug like it was the only solid thing left in her world. She didn't run, but her eyes said everything. She had been waiting. The first few minutes inside the farmhouse were tense, but controlled. Officers swept the rooms, clearing corners, checking for escape routes. Nothing unexpected. Just empty bottles, cold food on the counter, and a mattress on the floor. Marisol sat calmly in the kitchen chair. She didn't ask why they were there. She didn't reach for a lawyer. She just stared at the empty wall, like she'd been rehearsing this moment. Kapoor approached, not as an accuser, but as someone ready to listen. "We have your prints," she said. "On the jacket. On the pipe. On the back door of the lot." No response. Washington added, "We also have surveillance. You and Elias. The night he was last seen." Marisol finally looked up. Her face didn't twist in denial. There was no anger, no defiance. Just a tired breath and a slight shake of the head. "He came to me," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried weight. He said he was done. Wanted out. Asked if I could help him disappear. Said he'd go quiet, make it clean. She paused. I tried to slow him down. Told him to wait. Told him to let me talk to Kozlov. Kapoor leaned forward. But Kozlov found out before you could. Marisol didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was the first real confirmation they'd had. It wasn't just business, it was personal. Elias had trusted her, and now she carried what was left of that choice. Marisol sat without handcuffs, but she didn't move. The words came slowly, each one a release not just for the detectives but for her. Kozlov found out the next morning, she said. I don't know who told him. Maybe someone overheard us. Maybe he always knew. She clenched her hands together. He said Elias had made his choice. That he wasn't going to let him walk away with everything he'd seen. Kapoor listened, quiet, letting the story take shape. They followed him. He thought he had more time. He didn't, Marisol continued. They didn't plan to talk. Just finish it. Washington interjected. Who was there? Marisol exhaled. 2 guys from Kozlov's inner circle. I wasn't supposed to be there. But I showed up late. I saw him fall. Pause. He didn't cry out. Just looked at me like he knew it was coming. Marisol broke then, not with tears but with a slow collapse of posture. The kind of exhaustion that comes from running out of ways to justify yourself. She agreed to a formal statement. No resistance. No bargaining. Kapoor filed the paperwork while Washington reached out to their organized crime unit. Within 48 hours, Kozlov's name was on an arrest warrant. Multiple properties were searched. Files were seized. Kozlov's drivers, couriers, and bookkeepers were rounded up one by one. What began with a pipe in a forgotten lot had grown into something much larger. But for Amara, it wasn't closure, it was the start of something heavier. Truth is rarely clean. Amara stood at her brother's grave long after the others had left. The service had been quiet. No fanfare, just a gathering of people whose lives Elias had touched without ever knowing it. Former foster siblings, artists, outreach workers, even a few who had walked away from Kozlov's crew. Each one had a story, a shared meal, a kind word, a mural they passed by that made their day feel a little less heavy. She didn't speak at the funeral. Not because she didn't have words, but because she wasn't ready to let them go just yet. In the weeks that followed, Amara poured herself into her work. Not the city corruption case she had been drafting, but a series of personal essays. They weren't polished, at least not at first. They came raw, sometimes scribbled at 3 in the morning on the back of receipts or notepads. She called the series, The Brother I Never Knew. It wasn't just about Elias. It was about loss that wears another face. About lives cut short not by a single act of violence, but by decades of silence, negligence, and missed chances. She interviewed former foster parents, social workers, case managers. She traced his artwork, collecting photos of pieces that still clung to cracked walls across Riverside. Each article ended with a simple message: Elias Navarro lived. It was the truth he'd been denied in life, and one she refused to let disappear in death. Detective Kapoor didn't speak much after the trial. In public, she remained composed, professional, thoughtful, deliberate. But privately, the case lingered. Not the arrest, not even the confession. It was the DNA, the match. The way one choice, voluntarily uploaded data, could crack open histories that had been sealed for decades. She believed in the work. She believed in justice. But there were moments, especially late at night, when she found herself asking, at what cost? Kapoor began reaching out to legal scholars, ethicists, and other departments. Not to defend the methods, but to define them. She wanted rules, real ones. Guidelines that protected both truth and privacy. The Navarro case had proven how powerful the tools could be. But power without caution wasn't justice. It was just control. Across the city, Washington carried the story differently. He attended neighborhood forums and youth outreach events, not in uniform but as a speaker. Not to talk about crime, but to talk about Elias. He spoke of resilience, of quiet courage, of a man who tried to leave behind something better, even when the world refused to meet him halfway. Washington didn't offer lectures. He shared moments, small ones. Like the time he found a mural under a train bridge with a message painted in blue. You are more than what they left you with. He never confirmed who painted it. He didn't have to. He just told the crowd, that message, it was meant for all of us. At the edge of the cemetery, a woman laid down a photograph. It showed a mural Elias had painted years earlier. 2 children, side by side, their backs to the viewer, watching a city rise ahead of them. Someone placed a candle beside it. Another left a marker. By the time the sun dipped, the patch of grass had become more than a grave. It had become a message board, a memorial, a promise. Elias Navarro would not be forgotten. Neither would the silence that once surrounded him. In the months after the trial, change moved slowly, but it moved. Aisha Okoro, the longtime social worker who had remembered fragments of Elias's birth, took the lead on a citywide initiative to overhaul child placement protocols. Her proposal pushed for stronger tracking systems, more transparent record-keeping and trauma-informed care training for foster families. She spoke before the city council with conviction, holding up Elias's story not as a tragedy, but as a warning. She wasn't alone. Attorney Fatima Al-Hassan joined the effort, lobbying for legislation that would give adopted children easier access to their origin records once they reached adulthood. She cited Elias's case as proof that lives were being shaped, and lost, by paperwork buried in locked drawers. Even Luca Moretti, the bar owner who first tipped off detectives, shifted his path. He started working with a local outreach center, helping young adults with criminal records find stable work. He didn't speak much about what happened, but people noticed that he started locking the bar early, and that he'd stopped taking calls from old contacts. As for Amara, her articles gained traction. Syndicated by several outlets, they stirred conversation beyond Riverside about the systems we trust, the family ties we never knew were cut, and the cost of silence. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted change. Each article closed with Elias's name. Not because he was the focus, but because without him, none of it would have been written at all. Amara kept one photo by her desk, an old snapshot sent anonymously weeks after the funeral. Two infants swaddled in the same hospital blanket, lying side by side, unaware of the years ahead. She never found out who took it. Maybe a nurse. Maybe someone who saw what was coming and couldn't stop it. What mattered now wasn't the past, it was what she did with what remained. Every article she wrote became part of something larger. Not just for Elias, but for the others. The kids lost in the shuffle. The adults still wondering who they might have been. The families still waiting for names that never made it onto charts or records. Detective Kapoor, meanwhile, kept working cases, but she also began speaking at conferences, sharing the ethical considerations raised by the Navarro investigation. She advocated for thoughtful reform, not just in policy but in practice. Behind every data point, she reminded her audience, is someone's story. Washington never stopped showing up in the neighborhoods Elias once walked through. He didn't quote case files. He talked about the man who painted without asking for credit, who gave even when he had nothing to spare. As Riverside settled into its rhythm again, one truth remained. Elias Navarro didn't vanish. He was found. Not because someone remembered his name, but because someone refused to let him be forgotten. What did this story teach you about fate, justice, and family? If it moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Let's keep these stories alive, for the ones who were lost and the ones still waiting to be seen.